Thank you for coming to hear work in progress paper with a very sort of obscure title, but hopefully I'll be able to show you the way I'm thinking about it, and then I'm even more hopeful that you will let me know whether I'm thinking, like, whether I'm barking up the wrong tree, or maybe it's the right tree, or maybe a bit of both. So, you know, I'm here for feedback. But basically, I kind of wanted to start with Monty Python-esque moment of now to something completely different. I want to start with this. So this is UK life expectancy in the 1950s, and as you can see, you know, it's different for men and for women. Well, why is that? So here's the time for bad puns. Wait and see. So why start here? So I think, like, if you have to run away, the takeaway would be that Lewis is writing Till We Have Faces in his 50s. At this point, he actually realizes that body needs care too. Because before that, it's very much kind of soul versus the mind, as I'm hoping to demonstrate. So but the kind of third entity enters front stage. And of course, him being raised without mother from 11 years onwards, and kind of in a very masculine setup, kind of means that you have to ignore the body because that's a cultural thing. And therefore, kind of the idea is, when we look at Till We Have Faces, the story would have worked with just two sisters. And as I read it for the first time, I think in my late teens, I was like, you know, why do we need Redival? Like, she's really redundant. She's kind of, you know, extra, whatever, 50 pages could have been cut out. But then the more I looked at it, the more I realized that no, she has to be there. She's the integral part of the story. And not just because you need to have three sisters, but because for Lewis at that point, you know, he thinks increasingly about the function, the role of the body. So, but, you know, thank you very much for coming. Now we can go and have dinner. So, I just wanted to walk you through my line of argument, through my thinking. So, it actually started with Tolkien. When I was in high school, I read Leaf by Niggle for the first time. I still remember it was, I think, a very dull lesson of economics. And I was reading it under the table. And I was like, yeah, you know, I figured it out. Niggle is clearly Tolkien. But then I was like, but who's Parish? And then I told myself, like, I don't really know enough. I will figure it out one day. So fast forward 15, 20 years. So I'm teaching here at Oxford. I'm teaching courses like the Influence of Oxford, and students keep asking the same question when we look at Leaf by Niggle, and who do you think Parish is? And I'm like, oh, okay, such a wonderful question. What do you think? And very often they say, oh, you know, it's C.S. Lewis, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not convinced. So started thinking more about that. And at the same time, because I'm easily bored, I started doing MSc in developmental psychology, specializing in information transformation, dynamic maturation models. So basically what it says is that we've got two legs, as it were, to stand on in terms of how we receive and how we process information. One leg is cognition, the other leg is affect. And ideally, in order to stand firm and distort the information as little as possible, you kind of need to have balanced processing powers, i.e. you will rely on both cognition and affect. However, if you start prioritizing one or the other, either culturally or, you know, because of your I don't know, early developmental history. You need to survive, and in order to survive in this particular environment, you need to prioritize, I don't know, affective processing, or you need to prioritize cognitive processing. Then you kind of start leaning either towards one side or towards the other. So kind of the top part is the so-called balanced pattern. And then to that side, to the green side, you've got affect. So the kind of the further down the wheel you go, the more affect plays out in the processing of information. Here, the cognition side. So you've got, again, you prioritize cognition at the expense of affect. And then, like, if you go full circle, you kind of end up where Mr. Putin is. So this is psychopathy. So there you've got both false cognition and false affect. Interestingly enough, a lot of politicians actually here in the affective side of it. Because, you know, they speak to people's emotions, they speak to people's kind of gut feelings. This is how you get very quick response, whereas cognition takes more effort. Again, the kind of the idea of balancing things out was very important in my research at that point, and I was trying to apply it to what I was doing with history, with literature. So I kind of started thinking about how it maps out onto what I do with my Inkling tutorials and seminars. And I was kind of wondering whether the sort of the cognitive side maps out onto the explicit analytic side of their writings, and the affective maps out on the intuitive and imaginative, or imaginal, as some philosophers refer to it. So, and of course, we all come from the academia, and even now we tend to prioritize cognitive approach, right? You know, we do analysis, we do synthesis, and I remember my shock when I first came here 20 odd years ago, and I think one of the first lectures I attended was by Henry Meyer Harting, who started off by saying, you know, you master students, you've been around for long enough, you need to trust your gut when you're doing research. And we were all like, this is preposterous, what are they teaching here? You know, no, you need to use your brain. But like, you know, it took me a while to understand that he was right. Because I myself was prioritizing cognition at the expense of affect, and he was trying to bring us back into the balance. So you need to trust your gut as well as use your skills for your research. So, and kind of the more I looked at it, the more I realized that it helped me understand some things I could not hitherto quite grasp when looking at Tolkien's and Lewis's writings. I mean, like the actual opening of Surprised by Joy, I think this is literally like second paragraph. Lewis is talking about exactly the same thing. So he's talking about two parts of his family. And he's talking about his mum, and he clearly kind of sides with his mum, being, you know, the Hamiltons being the cooler race. And, you know, they're more critical and ironic, so they're on the cognitive side. And then he's quite dismissive of his dad, and he talks about, like, father's emotional life. And he says about, like, certain disgust or dislike of emotion, which he conceives as a result. So already at that stage, he is very much siding with the cognitive developmental pathway rather than affective one. And then, you know, obviously when he ends up with the great knock with Professor Kirkpatrick, who teaches him rhetoric, who teaches him logic, that kind of gets fossilized. And because he's preparing for Oxford, this is what Oxford wants. Oxford wants cognition, analysis, taking things apart. And we all know how he's struggling with that a little bit. And to me, the pivotal point is a poem he writes in mid-20s, so that's before he gets converted. This is the time when he makes friends with Tolkien, because first time I think they meet in 1926. So they start those conversations with Tolkien and Hugo Dyson about Christianity how it should not be seen as a set of doctrines. So it's a very cognitive approach. Let's take it apart. But Tolkien and Dyson encourage him to see it as a story, as a product of imagination, which actually became real. So they invite him to see Christianity not through argument, but through imagination. And I love this poem because, it's very Lewisy. As you know, Tolkien is very much like a train. He's very set in his ways, and he just he knows who he is very early on, and there are no U-turns throughout his life. Lewis is a complete opposite. He's like just, U-turn after U-turn. So this is a time when he's kind of reconsidering his outlook, I suppose. So he talks, remember he's trained as classicist, even more so than Tolkien. So Tolkien escaped after 2 years. Lewis stayed till the end, till the bitter end, until he realizes that there are no jobs, and then moves on to do 4th year with English. So it all starts with reason, right? And it's called reason. So he's still in the cognition camp, right? Set in the soul's Acropolis, the reason stands a virgin arm conversing with celestial light, and he who sins against her has defiled his own virginity. No cleansing makes his garment white. So there's something white, virginal, sitting on top of Acropolis. So clear is reason. But how dark, imagining, warm, dark, obscure, and infinite, daughter of night. Dark is right. We got it, it's dark. The beauty of her eyes with sleep is loaded, and her pains are long, and her delight. Tempt not Athene. So reason is Athene, would not, in her fertile pains, Demetra, nor rebel against her mother right. So this is my favorite bit. He says, "Oh, who will reconcile with me in me both maid and mother?" Right? Who will reconcile in me imagination and reason, affect and cognition? Who make in me a conqueror of the depth and height? Who make imaginations dim, exploring touch, ever report the same as intellectual sight? Then could I truly say, not deceive? Then wholly say that I believe. When I was in Cambridge, I was briefly taught by Malcolm Guide, and I think at this point he went, "He's behind you," or rather, "She's behind you," because who else will reconcile in him both maid and mother? But that's before he even considers Christianity. So he kind of answers his own question without realizing it, and without seeing the answer. He spelled it out, but he still can't see it. So in a way, what I'm seeing the same kind of attempt to balance things out. How am I going to bring it up to the wheel? I'm sitting here with reason, but then I've got that part. How do I integrate? I think Lewis himself said on several occasions that he was very kind of visual in his imagination, and it actually made me think, this thing is still in the Sméagol. If you go to cast galleries, it's there. And it was there at the point when Lewis arrives as a student and stays on as a fellow. So it kind of made me wonder whether the idea came to him when he went to the Sméagol and saw this. This is a model, late 19th century model of the Acropolis, and you've got the Acropolis, and you've got this kind of Dionysian theatre down there. So the kind of the reason and the imagination. So and that kind of brought me back to my musings about Leave by Niggle. So in the introduction to the joint edition of on fairy stories and Leaf by Niggle, Tolkien talks about how kind of these two are related is as even though one is an essay and the other is a story. So, but again, the same kind of idea of one is imagination, the effect, the other is the cognition, the kind of the academic side, right? The artist and the scholar. So, he kind of does it physically in this slim volume. What happens there? Like most of you know, Leave by Niggle, it's a very short story. I love it to bits. Again, it's probably the closest we get to kind of fictional autobiography of Tolkien. This is probably closest we get to an allegory, even though I'm like respecting Tolkien's own statement that he disliked allegory. I would not call it that. But I think, if we think about applicability, it's there, even if we don't want to push it all the way into the realm of allegory. So the kind of the idea of Parish and his wife and Niggle sharing this semi-detached house, sharing the same roof, again, already starts fossilizing into understanding that there's a very strong connection between the two, and of course it's fairly straightforward that Niggle is Tolkien because that's the kind of he calls himself a Niggler on a few occasions, and his perfectionism is well known. He's working on those stories infinitely, and then does not move with the kind of with the progress of the legendarium. So there's a lot of internal focus. So again, that's very straightforward. But then that was after reading Lewis's poem so many times, it kind of finally clicked that, it's obvious because Parish is also Tolkien. It's the family man, the colleague, and the name indicates external focus, the kind of the interest in the community. So, that's pretty self-explanatory. So, I'm sure most of you could see it straight away. I'm a slow animal, so bear with me. But that's not the end of it. It kind of finally clicked into place when I looked at this letter. It's a very famous letter by Tolkien. He's writing to Chris Tolkien, who's in the army, and those of you who are familiar with it, that's the one where he starts off by kind of moaning about, I think, Pembroke. He's still at Pembroke. So he moans about dining in the college, and then he talks about the Inklings meeting. Hugo was there, Hugo Dyson, rather tired looking, but reasonably noisy. So he mentions Warren Lewis's book on Louis XIV. Very good, I thought it. They're reading bits of C.S. Lewis's Who Goes Home, a book on hell. This is what is about to become the Great Divorce. I suggested should have been called rather Hugo's Home. I did not get till after midnight. For the rest of my time, barring chores in and outdoor, has been occupied by the desperate attempt to bring the ring to a suitable pause to the capture of Frodo by the orcs and passes of Mordor before I'm obliged to break off by examining. So he talks about how he finishes Shelob's lair. And then there's like a little moment when he has a go at Chris and says, like, if I would have changed his name if you allowed me, because of course hobbits of that class, where is it? Have very Saxon names as a rule. And I'm not really satisfied with the surname Gamgee. So Niggle, painting little leaves and not really moving with the story. And then he says, I have done no serious writing since Monday. Until midday today, I was sweating at section papers, so he was marking. Took my manuscripts to the press at 2 p.m. today, the last possible day, so we know he's a procrastinator. Yesterday, lecture puncture after fetching fish. I had to foot it to the town and back, and as bike repairs are impossible, I had to squander afternoon in grimly struggle, which ended at last in my getting tire off, mending one puncture of in a tube, and get in outer, and getting things on again. Whoa, triumph! But again, those of you who are familiar with Leaf by Niggle, you'll be like, this is real life kind of Parish Niggle. He wants to be in his shed painting his little leaves. But all he's required to do is, fetch fish and mend the bike, and the kind of the pressure of being torn between important things. And again, it's a recurrent joke. You get old, you look in the mirror and you think, oh my God, I'm turning into my mother, or oh my God, I'm turning into my father. Like, I look in the mirror and think, oh my God, I'm turning into Tolkien. Because, this is my life. I'm here and I'm enjoying it, but half of my brain is like, you should be home with your family, your kids need you, your husband needs you. And then when I'm there, upstairs, my computer is like, your novel is not finished, your article is not finished, the publisher's been waiting for your book for the past 5 years, and I go and do that, and there's something else, your students need you, your friends need you. So the kind of the need for integration is there because, there's only one you and there are so many things and so many roles. So, and kind of we know that Tolkien is thinking about it because we've got the example of Sméagol of failed integration, right? I don't have to spend too much time talking about that, but here we've got, rather than integration, we've got fusion, right? One part devours, consumes the other, it's Tolkien, right? It has to be expressed linguistically. So I'm still waiting for a really good article on code switching or discussion of dialect. But I've done some work with my student recently, and we discovered something very interesting. So we all know that Gollum really relishes sibilants, and he kind of makes up those super plural forms, right? Hobbitses. We started looking at which languages do that as well. Apparently. Malagasy language does it on some occasions. And then, what we found? Oriental Institutes, until recently, had this, concise grammar of Malagasy language. And who do you think gave it to Oriental faculty? Tolkien! And then they checked it out, and then a colleague bought it for, I think, $150. As a bargain. So, maybe he got the idea from there, who knows? But this is an example of failed integration. But, you kind of wonder whether, just like with Niggle and Parish, it's in the name, because, I'm not a linguist, so I've got people much better qualified to comment on that, but it's the kind of the doom nature of the name of the kind of burrow creeper, which connects him to Smaug, right? Because Smaug, as far as I can understand, is just the past form of Sméagol, right? So even in his supposedly good-ish or potentially redeemable form, he's doomed already. He's doomed by his name. And basically this is just to confirm that Tolkien is thinking about some kind of inner division and integration. healing in the 40s and early 50s. Now, if we go back to Leaf by Niggle, once I figured out, I was like, oh yeah, finally, and Parish is also Tolkien. But then I was like, what's the deal with Parish's wife? It's the same thing as with Redival. Like, we could have, like, is she just a vehicle for the story? She gets ill, and then Niggle has to cycle away, and then he gets drenched, and then he comes back, falls ill, dies, and he has to go on the journey. But then Parish does not go on to, paradise. He stays behind to wait for his wife. So I was like, nah, she's not just kind of a little bit of furniture. There's something important about her. But I decided, okay, I'll think about it later. And instead, with this, I started thinking about Till We Have Faces. And I mean, again, most of you know it. It's the story of Cupid and Psyche, written from the perspective of the ugly sister. And again, students were like, why do we need the third sister? It would have worked just fine with Psyche and Orual. And Orual is the narrator, so it's very much Lewis's voice trying to figure things out. He sees himself as this ugly sister. And again, like, Psyche is a soul. It's in the name. It's a no-brainer. And then Orual is the kind of the rational spirit, the mind, and we know how Lewis still kind of puts himself very firmly in this mind cognitive framework. And that was the moment when I was like, oh, of course, Redival is the body, because of course, she's the only one who has a family, and her son is needed to inherit the kingdom. So she's not really an accident in the story. But then, of course, you'll be like, oh, come on. So yeah, and then the kind of the three sisters, integrating them provides Lewis with hope of healing and integration. But then, so yeah, this is just to summarize. And again, thinking about the visual imagination of Lewis, this is another example from the Ashmolean, which was there from very early on. And again, I'm wondering whether at some point he was looking at Time and Again, and it gave him the idea, because we've got Psyche being tortured by Cupid, how delightful, and then there are two women looking at Psyche's suffering. And then, of course, classicists among us will be like, duh, like if you did proper classics, you would have known that Fulgentius in 5th century actually comments on the myth of Cupid and Psyche, and he spells out that her sister, that is flesh and free will, so they're integral for the story. I haven't found any direct references of Lewis talking about Fulgentius. So he may have encountered him indirectly, either through Oxonian scholar, 14th century scholar John Redival, but he doesn't really talk directly about that story. He kind of he takes it in a different direction. But then there's Boccaccio's kind of commentary on Fulgentius. And we've got some, we don't have manuscripts of it in the Bodleian, but there's one in the British Library, which is 9th century, which is, 9th century, how cool is that? It's not 5th century, but still old enough. So you can see there, Psyche et cupidinus. So that's the lost part of it, and this is where it says, suis sororibus id est carni et liberata, right? So the free will. So I think Lewis is kind of thinking about it along the same lines, but I don't think Till We Have Faces is a direct commentary on Fulgentius. And actually, the kind of on a tangent, Fulgentius, we're not quite sure whether there were two of them or one, because we know one of them was bishop, one of them was the kind of, mythographer. They may have been the same person because they come from the same region and they're roughly they're around at the same time. But the bishop one, his feast day is Tolkien's birthday, so he's one of Tolkien's patron saints. And so this is, again, even more of a tangent, but I really love this illustration. Like, whenever you see a medieval manuscript which is weird and you can't locate, it's likely to be either Bavaria or Bohemia. So this, I think, from Bavaria. And that's a visual commentary on, yet another commentary on Fulgentius. And supposedly this is it wrath or is it fear? But to me, if anything, it's probably a great medieval depiction of depression. So since we're talking about integration and kind of mental health issues. So we know that Lewis, kind of as he grows older, he emphasizes the importance of body, particularly when it comes to devotion. So but he's already thinking about it, kind of the extremes of asceticism and indulgence in his first work on fiction, Pilgrim's Regress. But then in Screwtape Letters, he discusses the body. Probably the most striking examples come from a much later work, which is Letters to Malcolm, mostly on prayer. So he talks about various kind of theological things which are fairly straightforward, but also he talks about the importance of bodily position. This is why I put the image of Lewis Brothers' favorite pew in, Holy Trinity, Hedgington Quarry Church, because they like their space, because positioning your body in space helps with devotion. So it's a kind of, again, the integration of cognition and effect within the body. Sorry, I'm just looking at the time. Yeah, I've got some time. So I put some examples here, but the most striking example for me so far comes from scraps. These are passages which were published in God and the Dog collection, and apparently these were initially from 1945, and I know it's fiction, I know it's a kind of fictional dialogue, but the disconnect is really amazing because he says, you are always dragging me down, said I to my body. He is not the body, he's something else. There's still no integration. His body is external to him. Drag me down, replied my body. Well, I like that. Who taught me to like tobacco and alcohol? You, of course, with your idiotic adolescent idea of being grown up. So again, he's being driven by cognition. Cognition is me. My body is kind of external to me. There's no integration. And then it kind of goes on. And what about sex, said I. Yes, what about it? Retorted the body. If you and your wretched imagination would leave me alone, I'd give you no trouble. That's soul all over. So again, there's no integration, there's fragmentation. So it's like me, mind, idea, there's soul, which is separate, and there's body, which is also separate. Again, I understand this is fiction, but it's very telling that it's a very fragmented piece of writing. So again, you're probably thinking, oh my God, she's doing psychology. And yes, I take potential objection that I think Mark Twain said that for a person with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, you know, since I'm doing finishing my course on developmental psychology, everything starts looking as either dissociation or integration. But I read it for the first time. I was like, wow, okay. So I saw that in clinical examples of people with severe dissociation, which potentially means he was a very good writer, or potentially means that there's a little bit of fraction self happening here. So from there, I kind of went back to my Parish dilemma, because I'm thinking, well, okay, if Redival if her presence is justified, and she is the kind of integral part of that triad, then what do we do with Parish's wife? And then I was thinking, well, okay, how about we try to apply the same scheme here? So if Niggle is kind of the sub-creator, Tolkien the sub-creator, if Parish is Tolkien the kind of member of professional community, or community of a broader community, then I'm wondering whether Parish's wife is this kind of more, I don't know, embodied version of Tolkien, what medieval French tradition calls ami, right? So lover or friend or a king's person. In a way, looking at Till Their Faces allowed me to go back to Leave My Niggle and kind of integrate the text for myself. I don't know, you don't have to buy into it, but I thought, yeah, medievalist, that would probably work. And again, I started looking at Tolkien's letters, and I found some interesting examples of kind of indirect support of this reading. So another famous letter, also from the 40s, it's a very famous one, it's a very grim one. So he's writing to Michael, his second son, on love, women, and marriage. But there's some rays of light in it, because he talks about the kind of men's dealing with women can be purely physical. He can really, of course, but I mean, he can refuse to take other things into account, to the great damage of his soul and body and theirs, or friendly, or he can be a lover, engaging and blending all his affections and powers of mind and body in a complex emotion, powerfully colored and energized by sex. This is a fallen world, of course. He accepts, and then he talks about the kind of the idea of romantic chivalric love. So and of course he says that it's not really about God, but kind of good enough for the purposes. And there's another example. Do I have a date? Also from the 40s, there's a very angry draft of a comment on C.S. Lewis's booklet, Christian Behavior. So what annoys Tolkien at that point is that Lewis basically says that, marriage works within the church, but also works within the community. Like if you have civic marriage. He says, but look now at whatever pages, there you will observe that you are really committed with the Christian church as a whole to the view that Christian marriage, monogamous, permanent, rigidly faithful, is in fact the truth about sexual behavior for all humanity. This is the road of total health, including sex in proper place, for all men and women. And then he calls the idea of two-marriage system, which Lewis advocates, an abomination. And of course, it kind of comes back to haunt him later. So this is basically, I think, a week after C.S. Lewis dies. And he writes to his son Michael, and he says, "I'm sorry that I've not answered your letter sooner, but Jack Lewis's death on the 22nd has preoccupied me." So basically, he's saying, like, people keep writing to me, still regard me as one of his intimates. Alas, that ceased to be so some 10 years ago. We were separated first by sudden apparition of Charles Williams, and then by his marriage, of which he never even told me. I learned of it long after the event. I wonder why. Surprise! You know, if you know anything about Lewis's marriage, right? So they go through civic marriage first, and then they have difficulty, having church marriage, because they can't get dispensation. So in the end, there's the kind of spiritual marriage held in hospital. So, but for Tolkien, this is a big no-no twice. I mean, of course, Lewis didn't tell him, and he made himself perfectly clear, right? Okay, sorry. Nearly there. Whoop. And then just there's a kind of PS to this. I wanted to show you two responses, C.S. Lewis's and Tolkien's, to the loss of their wives. When Joy dies, Lewis writes, "In grief observed, she was my daughter and my mother, my people and my teacher, my subject and my sovereign, and always holding all these as solution, my trusty comrade, friend, shipmate, fellow soldier, my mistress. But at the same time, all that any man friend, and I have good ones, have ever been to me, perhaps more." I mean, it's very Lewis, he talks, he has this skill of talking about both himself and other people at the same time without losing focus. Tolkien's response, so he's writing to Christopher Tolkien, kind of not quite a long time, but a few months after Edith Tolkien's death. So he says, "I have at last got busy about Mummy's grave. The inscription should like this. I should like this. It is Edith married Tolkien, the dates, and then Luthien. Brief and jeune, except for Luthien, which says for me more than a multitude of words. For I knew she was my Luthien." And then, in a very touching way, he talks about it, but he doesn't really talk about her. He talks about Silmarillion. He talks about his creative work. He talks about Legendarium. And this, again, the response is very, very different. It's the idea of Edith Tolkien rather than Edith Tolkien. So again, very different approach. Anyway, sorry. Back to my point. So what I'm sort of trying to indicate is that I'm kind of using Tolkien and Lewis as a mutual illumination pathway. So while Lewis clarifies Parish and Parish's wife for me, then Tolkien clarifies Redival's necessity for Lewis's Till We Have Faces. And then both of them kind of model integration without erasure, where we've got parts and they all contribute to one whole. And I mentioned that I'm a slow animal. If you got there much quicker than I did, then well done you. And then finally, just wanted to mention a couple of things. We still tend to think about kind of binary or dichotomies. And what I wanted to do, I wanted to see things a little bit more complex. It's not like it has to be brought into balance, and we need more than one leg to stand on. yeah, and just wanted to finish with a couple of quotes on hope and on joy, because we wake up every morning and watch the news, and this is another hope for integration. So at some point, all these bits of fragmented world may come together and finally start making sense. So yeah. Thank you very much.